Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a list of some books with some endings I don't particularly love. I recently did a video talking about endings I do love, and I gave a warning in that one that I want to give again, which is that while I'm not going to be talking about specifics or details, so therefore it's not going to be spoilery, I know sometimes people don't even want to know if the ending is sad or happy, etc. So I'll have some timestamps down below. If there's any of them that you want to avoid hearing anything about, then you'll know when to skip. Jumping into it, I wanted to start with an ending to a series that I do overall very much like, and that would be the Witcher series, Lady of the Lake. I don't hate this ending. I don't think it's the worst ending in the world. Things just happen, and it's definitely up in the air, which is not something I'm opposed to. It's one of those endings where there's some room for interpretation, and I like that a lot about a lot of the things in the story, because that's something Sapkowski does quite often throughout the Witcher series. That element didn't bother me. It was more that this last book I feel like we hyped up certain things so much, and then I don't feel like the ending really tied things together. Switching to a book that is very different from the Witcher series, we have Serpent and Dove. This story in general is just crazy. It's so ridiculous, and I feel like it's entertaining because it's so absurd. It's a witch hunter and a witch, and the witch hunter doesn't know that the girl is a witch, but through some crazy circumstances, they end up married to one another. I was totally fine with the level of cheesiness and silliness that was this book, but there's just a particular scene at the end of the book that just took it a little too far for me. I felt like it was not a good time for that scene to happen, and I think when I did my review for it, I even was like, there was one scene at the end, I just pretended that scene didn't happen. If you guys want really spoilery thoughts about it, don't even bother watching my review. You can just go watch Read with Cindy talk about it, because everybody knows it's very entertaining to hear her rant about it. Next up, we have a story, and it hurts me a little to have it on this list. I don't hate this ending, I didn't love it, and that would be the ending of Oathbringer. I attribute a lot of the things I disliked about this particular book, because I still ended up loving it. I just don't like it as much as the first two. It's the third book in the Stormlight Archive series, and I attribute a lot of my dislikes to the fact that it is technically right smack in the middle of the first arc, because it's a planned 10-book series with 2 5-part arcs, so that would make this the middle book, and I think it has middle book syndrome. The reason, though, that the ending specifically wasn't my favorite was because I felt in the first 2, Sanderson did the most amazing job of having so much prep and build up and character development and stakes and politics, and when you see all those things come together, it's so satisfying and it's so action-packed. With the first one, Way of Kings, I read that and I'm like, man, that was one of the best endings I've ever read. And then Words of Radiance came along and was like, hey, you liked that ending? Here's another one, 2.0. And I was like, dang, that ending was also amazing. And this one was like, oh, I'm gonna kind of try to top those. And it didn't really work for me. There's a couple of situations toward the end where there's like a short story novella that takes place between books 2 and 3. That particular story, that character kind of shows up at the end. They show up throughout a little bit, but I also feel like they play a decent role at the end of this one. There was also some characters that before weren't really allies per se, and then they show up and everybody's just like, well, I'll take whatever help I can get, and then like everybody's just fine with that person showing up. Also, people throughout the interludes kind of had some things happen in the end. It just felt like so many things coming together that's normally right up my alley, but in this one, I just don't think it was as good as the first 2. Next 2 books that I'm going to mention, I don't own because of the endings. One of them would be The Bird and the Blade. I loved this book until the end. Oh man, I hated the ending so much. It's a retelling. I think retellings sometimes are hard because you want to add your own original spin, but at the same time, sometimes you feel confined to trying to do what the original did. I don't want to say what the original was because it might spoil some things for people, but this story was like an examination of a character who went through some terrible things and as a result has just a heartbreaking story. And then you get that story and it's a love story and it's a historical fiction. But the ending for me was, I just didn't think it fit. I didn't think it fit the way the rest of the story was told. I felt like it just was because that was the ending of the original story, and I was so disappointed. It's also just like, I didn't like it. I didn't like that ending, and I'm like, that didn't go with everything else I just read. It is a more tragic ending. I love tragic endings, so it's not because it was sad. It was because it didn't work with the rest of the story for me. Man, I actually ended up putting that book on as an honorable mention for one of my favorite books of last year because I loved so much of the rest of it and just hated the ending. Ugh. It was so good otherwise. The other one that I don't own would be The Wicked Deep, and this is a story that overall I didn't absolutely love the way I did The Bird and the Blade, but I was definitely enjoying this story. And then I got to the end and I was like, oh, I like that ending. That was a good ending. And then I turned the page and I'm like, wait, there's more? And I think it was 2 pages. And those 2 pages, I was like, what? It was so weird and creepy, kind of. I was not about it. I told myself too with that one, I was like, you know what? I think I can just kind of ignore that part and tell myself it ended right before that. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I just can't forget that ending. And I had to take it into my local used bookstore because I was like, somebody else won't mind that ending. The next books that I'm going to mention are all books that I actually talked about in a recent video. So for those of you that tend to watch pretty regularly, I'm probably going to say some similar things. If you wanted to skip that part, this part, I can understand completely. The Last Argument of Kings, Queen of Nothing, these were all mentioned in a video I did talking about books that I don't care for necessarily, but I love the rest of the author's works, or I really enjoy other things they've written. For me, with these particular 2, they are the conclusions to trilogies. They're not terrible whatsoever. With Queen of Nothing, it was just not what I was expecting because the second one was a lot of scheming, a lot of backstabbing, a lot of not knowing who to trust. And then the third one was like, never mind, everything's fine. With Last Argument of Kings, I found that the ending of this one, I just didn't find it satisfying. I thought there were so many things that were introduced throughout the trilogy that we kind of got answers to, but the answers were just kind of like, oh, I guess that's it then? There was a lot of action scenes. I like Joe Abercrombie's action scenes. I like action scenes in general. But it felt like most of the action scenes didn't have a ton of consequences. Just in general, anytime somebody is really seriously injured and then all of a sudden they're right back at it pretty quickly after, I get to a point where I'm like, if that's the case, then these action scenes are kind of pointless. The next book on this list would be The Diabolic. This is a story that I was not expecting to be so invested in. I was really captivated by the world. I was really loving it. And then the author kind of started to use some tropes I don't really like. A specific trope, I should say, that I'm not a fan of. And I was like, oh, but okay, I can get past it. We'll see what happens. And then things started to turn around. At the end, the character fell into a different trope I don't like. And I was like, dang it. This is the closest I'm probably going to get in this video to straight up spoilers. It's not specifics, but again, if you're really sensitive to hearing anything, even if it's somewhat vague, so I'm going to talk about the tropes specifically, so if you don't want to hear this part, you can skip. But one of the tropes was the, I know that if I let you get really close to me, it will put you in danger, so I'm just gonna be really annoying and push you away and be really standoffish and not explain why the heck I'm doing this, so then you're confused and I'm sad that I'm just so in pain that I can't be close to you, but it's for the better, even though it's not for the better, and if people could just talk, it would be all fine. So that trope, I don't like that trope, and I was really frustrated because the character that was doing this was not a character that should have been doing this, so I was like, what are you doing? Stop it. Things kind of changed, and we're kind of working our way out of that, and I was like, finally, good, okay. And then the trope that I don't like that started to happen toward the end was it doesn't matter how many bad things the bad guy has done and proven that they're bad. For whatever reason, I'm just gonna suddenly believe the nonsense they're telling me now. I can't stand that. When a character is fooled by the antagonist, when the antagonist clearly is bad, and then they're like, but am I? And then the person's like, are they? Question mark? It's like, yeah, they clearly are. The last book on this list is going to be The Poppy War. Our main character just became kind of unbearable, and they were just like a light switch of, oh, I feel so terrible about the things I have done. And then a second later, somebody would be like, you did do some pretty terrible things. And they're like, well, I had to. You felt bad a second ago, and now somebody's calling you out on the bad thing you did. And now you're like, well, it is what it is. It's done. Time to move on. And when you end a book like that, I'm like, well, this character is insufferable. I don't want to read another story where they're wishy-washy. Am I good? Am I bad? I don't know. I didn't feel like it was done in a way that something like, I was talking about First Law earlier. I feel like the gray morality in First Law is fantastic. And this character, it was like, I can't decide. And I just was really annoyed by that. That's it though for some endings that I wasn't really a big fan of. Let me know what some of your least favorite endings are. I would love to know. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.